The Boys. Really, as a fan of this amazingly refreshing and thrilling show since it first began airing in 2019, I've been eagerly waiting and anticipating for the finale, the final season, to see where the story builds to and how it all wraps up. But given the trajectory of the show in the previous season, I think it's fair to say that expectations weren't exactly through the roof. And this ending, like a lot of bigger franchises ending recently, does seem to leave a bit of a bitter taste in fans' mouths. That being said, I think there's really a lot to unpack and talk about here, so I can't wait to share my thoughts and feelings with you guys. Do leave a comment to see if you agree with me on what thoughts you have of The Boys final or the entire series as a whole. Please do also like and subscribe to the channel, and let's dive right into it. The Boys is an Amazon original TV series adapted from a comic book of the same name, published in 2006. But other than taking the setting, the worldview, and the characters from the comic book, really, the plot and a lot of other things are quite different. The main theme of the show is satire and parody of politics and current affairs. The story mainly focuses on a group of vigilantes called the Boys, led by William Butcher, who all have their reasons to want to take down the superheroes of this universe. The superheroes in this universe are basically all corrupt assholes who are managed by a huge private corporation called Vought to do some of the most heinous things imaginable, and they are led by Homelander.
I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better, I am better!
Who is basically an evil Superman. The show went through a bit of a production hell to begin with. This iteration that we now see is initially written in 2018 and was released in 2019, really at the height of Marvel's powers with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was initially mostly focused on being satire and parody of Marvel and Disney.
You on the VCU timeline.
Phases 7 through 19.
But later evolved to be more focused around drawing the similarities between Homelander and Donald Trump as these kind of egotistical, all-American tyrannical rulers. Now, before I actually go on to do the review of the show, first thing first, spoiler alert. I'm not really going to be diving into too much details. I'll be trying to avoid spoilers, but in doing some of these reviews, it would be inevitable that we need to talk a little bit about how the show ended or where the characters went to kind of see whether it was good or bad. So there will be a little bit of spoilers. If you intend to watch the show and haven't yet, or if you have somehow managed to avoid all the spoilers online till now for some reason, please go check out the show first before continuing to watch this video. And interestingly, when I was actually searching online for the ratings and reviews of the show, it wasn't actually that bad, which is quite contrary to the general fan sentiment online. And the fan sentiment was definitely true. It wasn't just an echo chamber, because the creators of the show or the cast of the show came out to kind of respond to a lot of the fan criticisms. So it's something that was definitely felt on their end as well. I'm not exactly sure if this is just like corporate power kind of buying up reviews and ratings, or it could also be because I do think that the season as a standalone in and of itself wasn't terrible. The problem is that as the kind of finale and wrap up to this grand franchise and saga, it often falls quite short. Firstly, let's talk about the good things in this final season, because, well, there weren't many. Firstly, I really liked the characters of Firecracker and Allfather. I think these two characters were very entertaining and engaging. The performances by Valerie Curry and Daveed Diggs really brought these characters to life. Their arcs were also satisfying. The characters were given the right amount of time to build up, and they were very entertaining, and they would always steal the scene when they were on the screen. I think in general, the cast and the performances were still great. Especially Antony Starr as Homelander has always been applauded for how well he brought that character to life since the beginning of the show. I think management of the tension in this season was still pretty good. It was kind of like that iconic milk drinking scene at the beginning of Inglourious Basterds, where the character that you're supposed to care about on the screen was dealing with this kind of dynamic, well built up and smart villain, and you could really feel the tension. The tension was palpable. It jumps off the screen, and you feel like there is a real cost to what's going on in front of your eyes. The problem with this season was that all that tension built up never really dropped to any significant consequences. Which leads me nicely to the first main criticism of this final season, which is the pacing of the show. Fans were promised this kind of dramatic, scorched earth, big set piece conclusion with kind of satisfying wrap-ups to all of the different character arcs. But nothing really happened for basically the first 7 episodes of what's an 8-episode season. The creator of the show, Eric Kripke, has come out and said that he believes they need to invest more time into building up the backstory of these characters and the stakes so that people actually care about the ending and the conclusion. And that is true for the new storylines and the new characters such as like Firecracker and Allfather. But the problem is, while you're doing all of that, you ignore the initial core cast of characters that you've already spent 4 seasons building up and that people care about. Like, while the other characters got a lot of time to develop, the core cast of characters just went on this kind of build-up trajectory for the past 4 seasons and it just gone boom in the final conclusion. When I think most people would have wanted to see more of what they were going to do, how they've evolved, how they've changed, and what the end or satisfying end to their stories would be. Secondly, I think the show ultimately fell victim to a lot of the issues with modern day entertainment, having to kind of build up the wider franchise or worldview in order to monetize on sequels, prequels, or spin-offs.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them!
The show very much became the villain that it was meant to defeat. I mean, part of the pacing issues with the last season was that 2 to 3 episodes was basically devoted to the boys chasing after and building up a character called Bombsight, which is set up to be one of the main characters of an upcoming spin-off series. Now, I believe this character has only been name dropped once before in the entire 4 seasons prior to this, and never actually played any significant role in the show. There's also kind of these kind of random characters from another spin-off series called Gen V that came in and then basically did nothing and just showed up for a cameo. And lastly, there was one of the major moments in the series where one of the characters come into confrontation with Homelander, and it's resolved because that character said that, well, this is what Clara would have wanted, which has become one of the main memes that came out of this final season. And this very much felt like a moment in Batman vs Superman, when there was the Martha moment and come up suddenly these kind of 2 very big characters just resolved the difference because another woman figure character would have wanted something different or kind of was a common ground between these 2 people.
Save Martha!
I also think the show, over the course of its run, slowly became too overly obsessed with the political satire component of it. Homelander went from being this smart but fucked up all-powerful psychopath to a lunatic deluded with a god complex. Like, Homelander at the beginning of the show was this incredibly dynamic and 3-dimensional character. He was a villain. You never really quite sympathized with him, but at the same time you understood where he was coming from and you could see the many different faces of this character. He was someone who deep down inside very much craved to be understood, to be recognized and loved in a world where he saw no equals and no one was kind of on his level or really took the time to understand him deep down inside. And that is really how the show kind of justified why he didn't kill off Butcher and the main characters in the earlier seasons. Now, this is partly speculation as an audience, but I think a lot of it came from the fact that Homelander in Butcher saw someone who, despite having diametrically opposed motivations to approach the same problem from completely different angles, was someone who deep down inside understood Homelander. Because Butcher was also someone who didn't have any family love growing up, who was also willing to do anything or whatever it takes to get his way. And that made a lot of sense for these characters. But in turning Homelander into this kind of meme version of Donald Trump, into a parody of Donald Trump, we turned him into a lunatic or someone who really doesn't think about things as rationally in order to mirror the real world. And instead of building on what that character naturally would have evolved with, or naturally would have evolved into from the beginning, it completely twisted what it was, and then it made the character much less interesting. Like, throughout this final season, you could sense its kind of desperate need to parody real world politics. Homelander in this season tries to hijack the Christian church in order to kind of further empower himself. I know that there's a lot to be said about how life imitates art or how art imitates life, and fans and audiences will always go wow when, like, The Simpsons manages to predict the future. And Eric Kripke himself came out to comment on issues such as, like, in the show they built a golden statue of Homelander to worship him as a god, and in real life a golden statue of Donald Trump was enacted. And there are kind of scenes where Homelander calls himself Jesus and try to portray himself as the second coming of Christ, and in real world when Donald Trump posts an AI image of himself as Jesus. But these kind of factors and elements all kind of compromises the initial narrative of this character. I remember that in season 3, there was the storyline of how Homelander was, inevitably still facing the problem of aging, how he was fading in his powers, having been once at the peak or like the apex. And that storyline just went nowhere. It seemed like it was completely forgotten. That would have been a reasonable way or a satisfying way of taking this character forward, or to see how this character copes with the idea that even, a god or a superhuman ages and fades. But that was just completely dropped and it was never picked up again. This also leads to what, in my opinion, is that a lot of these motivations of the characters don't make a lot of sense. At the end of season 3, there was a scene where there was a chance that Butcher could have taken down Homelander, but Butcher stepped in and stopped it because there was a chance that this action would have hurt a little kid. But somehow, after 2 more seasons, at the end of this season 5, they're basically put into the exact same situation again, where a kid could have been hurt and Butcher just goes with it now. There's also a character of Hugh Campbell, who is one of the main protagonists of this series, and he has always kind of played the character of being this good kid at heart, who always tries to approach things with the nicest, most sympathetic possible way. And he was like kind of this canary in the coal mine, right? And I kind of understand this. As a much less established creator and writer myself, I get why you don't want this character to die, or I get why you don't want this character to change. But at the same time, when this happens, when you want to kind of keep this character the way it is, I would firstly debate whether or not it's possible, given how much this character has gone through over these 5 seasons, to kind of stay that innocent little kid. But even if so, his behavior wouldn't be quite the same way. If he has been through so much, his reaction wouldn't still be to stick with Butcher regardless of how many fucked up things he does. If he still is this little kid, he would eventually leave this method or way of approaching it. And as a result, you have a character who stands out from his surroundings, who doesn't kind of echo or feel the same way about things as the people in his surroundings, but he still sticks with this group, and every single time when something happens, he's just here saying like, oh, we can't do things this way, oh, that's not the right way to do it, and he ends up just becoming incredibly annoying. I also personally didn't watch the Gen V series, but based on the comments and feedbacks I read online, it seems that the kind of random cameo of Gen V characters that appeared in the final season were also generally perceived to be very poorly dealt with. Now, to sum it all up, I don't want to come across as an over-hater of the show. Like, again, I am a fan of the franchise, and it does seem that the kind of ratings and reviews that I see online are generally more positive than what the perceived fan sentiment of it is. I think as a standalone season, it wasn't terrible in terms of content and the transition of it, but it doesn't mean it makes for a good conclusion of an entire story. I think the show ultimately got bogged down by too much of having to build up this profitable franchise that is The Boys, and it was too obsessed with the concept or the idea of the political parody of it all, at the cost of it being a coherent and well thought through structured story, with dynamic and reasonable characters. But that could be in part because the real world we live in doesn't make the most sense in and of itself right now. As a whole, I would give this final season a 3 out of 10. But do leave a comment, let me know what you thought about the series as a whole or this finale. I would love to hear what other fans thought of it. And please do like and subscribe to the channel if you found that review reasonably entertaining and insightful.